Ferrari, McLaren and Mercedes all have Red Bull firmly in their sights and all have different technical weaknesses to overcome before they can reach their target. But there is a separate problem that each of them has in common that will only become more difficult to deal with as their F1 cars become more competitive. This has nothing to do with aerodynamic testing restrictions, cost caps or anything else F1 might be dreaming up to balance out the performance of the championship's best teams, and everything to do with the people those teams employ to get the most from the machinery they make. The drivers. At the start of 2023, we ranked F1's driver lineups from worst to best, and 3 of the top 4 places in that ranking went to the pairings at Mercedes, Ferrari and McLaren. Given Sergio Perez keeps underperforming for Red Bull since we made our list, you could make a strong case for dropping Perez and Max Verstappen out of the top 3 in favour of McLaren's Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. But whichever way you want to slice it, the current lineups at Ferrari, McLaren and Mercedes are extremely strong, and strong driver lineups inevitably and unavoidably create major stress for their teams. After the prolonged inner turmoil of the Hamilton-Nico Rosberg era, the relatively benign partnership of Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas no doubt provided some welcome relief for Toto Wolff's stress levels. Bottas was pretty fast over a single lap, somewhat lacking in racecraft and tyre management skills compared to F1's truly elite drivers, but he was still a real asset to Mercedes because his straight-talking nature and simple desire for the best man to win meant Hamilton could focus on external battles with Ferrari and Red Bull rather than expending valuable energy worrying about what his own teammate might be up to. Hamilton-Russell falls somewhere between these two stools. It currently lacks the white-hot intensity of Hamilton and Rosberg's bitter rivalry, but is also a more uncomfortable dynamic for Hamilton than he became used to with Bottas. Among F1's top teams, Hamilton and Russell are also the most evenly matched pairing. Although Hamilton comfortably defeated Russell in the 2023 championship, Russell was actually 0.021% faster than Hamilton in qualifying on average over the course of the season, which equates to just under 0.02 of a second over a theoretical 90-second lap. For Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, that gap was just over 0.2, and for Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, only 0.03 of a second more again. For context, Perez works out at just under 0.3 of a second slower than Verstappen on average, when you discount sessions disrupted by technical problems, changing weather conditions, or drivers getting blocked by other cars. Those numbers won't tell you everything because they cannot take account of the car's effect on driver performance, but they do tell you that Russell is extremely close to Hamilton on pure pace on a consistent basis. The average gap for their 2 seasons as teammates works out at 0.03 of a second in Russell's favour, so there's basically nothing to choose between them in terms of outright pace. When Hamilton was up against Rosberg, the gap between them in qualifying grew each season, and averaged out at just under 0.1 of a second in Hamilton's favour. Against Bottas, that gap was just over 0.1 in Hamilton's favour. So, on current evidence, Russell is comfortably the toughest Mercedes teammate Hamilton has faced so far. It's also noticeable that tension is beginning to appear whenever these two are running close together on track. They collided in Qatar, of course, for which Hamilton rightly took the blame, but there were also some testy radio messages from Russell when the two Mercedes battled each other for track position in Japan and Brazil. Russell is still very much in the phase of his career where he is improving and still believes he can eventually match or even surpass Hamilton. As Russell gets closer, it moves Mercedes back towards a potential Hamilton-Rosberg dynamic. Russell is known to be a very driven and pushy character behind the scenes. He is very unlikely to sit back and wait patiently for Hamilton to move aside. This is all much easier for Mercedes to keep a lid on while the car remains uncompetitive, but Russell isn't going to want to play master-apprentice with Hamilton for long. Despite Russell's obvious reverence for Hamilton, and Hamilton talking about wanting to help Russell develop into his natural successor, Hamilton won't want to be easing back either while he's still chasing that missing 8th title. For now, the inferiority of Mercedes cars is of much greater concern, but if the W15 finally addresses Mercedes' aerodynamic shortfalls in ground effect, then this teammate pairing arguably has the greatest capacity to tip into seriously uncomfortable territory. Spice rating, 4 out of 5. Definitely some heat to this already, yet to properly explode into a raging inferno, but they've collided once, the pace gap is vanishingly small, and there have been several arguments over team radio. More heat to come, surely. The battle between Leclerc and Sainz might better be characterised as a battle between each driver and the volatile internal politics of Maranello. The first year of Fred Vasseur's reign as team principal appears to have calmed a situation that was fraught with uncertainty after Mattia Binotto carried the can for Ferrari limping out of the 2022 title race, and this has altered the dynamic for the drivers too. Leclerc continues to show he is Ferrari's out-and-out fastest driver, and perhaps the fastest of all in F1 right now over a single lap in qualifying. But only recently has he looked back to his best, helped undoubtedly by his personal faith in Vasseur to lead Ferrari in the right direction. Leclerc clearly lacked that ultimate faith in Binotto, whose Ferrari team was prone to lacking the sort of self-critical introspection that drives Leclerc forward. Binotto's Ferrari didn't really know how to develop its car properly, and also at times seemed prone to favouring the slower of its two drivers in race-critical situations. On the flip side of that coin comes a sense that Leclerc lacks capacity to force those situations to his own advantage, and maybe also lacks the ruthless edge to his personality that ensures someone like Verstappen, for example, always retains internal advantage at Red Bull. Vasseur's leadership, it seems, bridges some of that gap and allows Leclerc to relax in a way he maybe couldn't before. On paper, this teammate pairing looks the most complementary, given Sainz is renowned for his technical understanding and has an immense capacity for self-improvement. This skill set would no doubt have endeared him to Binotto, who of course made the play to snare Sainz away from McLaren in the first place. Sainz has also shown he absolutely has that spare capacity for effective race management, hard-headed and selfish enough to challenge his team when he feels it's necessary, and also able, much like his hero Fernando Alonso, to read races expertly from within the car. If the car balance is to Leclerc's liking, as it seemed to be once Ferrari upgraded the car's floor in Japan, then he is likely to beat Sainz as a natural consequence of his pure speed. But Sainz has gone up against some of the best drivers in modern F1 in his time, and as Verstappen and Norris will know, is not a comfortable teammate for anyone to have. Sainz keeps improving and keeps finding ways to unlock performance from himself. So long as Sainz maintains a bulletproof mentality, he will make sure Leclerc doesn't always enjoy an easy ride. Over the final 7 races of 2023, excluding the weather-affected qualifying session in Brazil, the performance gap between them was lower than the season average, less than 0.2 of a second in Leclerc's favour. Sainz is someone who simply doesn't go away. Leclerc-Sainz is currently the best balanced teammate pairing in terms of outright performance, complementary skills, and a relatively civilised internal dynamic. Personality is the key here. Sainz has the ruthless number one mindset, but not quite the outright speed. Leclerc has the speed, but arguably not the ruthless mindset. Leclerc's passionate love of Ferrari and preparedness to sacrifice himself for the good of the team, as seen in Singapore, also really helps Ferrari in terms of managing the pair. That is something Verstappen would surely never do for Perez. The overriding question at Ferrari now is whether Leclerc will become a different and more ruthless operator when the stakes are higher again, or is he simply too nice for that? Leclerc is clearly trusting Vasseur to manage Ferrari in his best interests, and Leclerc's reported new long-term contract is testament to that renewed faith. So now he just needs to focus on bludgeoning Sainz with that pure speed. The problem for Sainz, even though he has made Leclerc's life tough for much of their time together at Ferrari and was the one who capitalised when Ferrari's 2023 car was at its best, is that he's now feeding on scraps from Leclerc's table and has to consider how to respond to the growing impression Ferrari is moulding itself around Leclerc. If Sainz ultimately decides he's fed up with playing Rubens Barrichello to Leclerc's Michael Schumacher, then Vasseur is going to have a different kind of problem on his hands to the one that eventually cost Binotto his job. This is one teammate pairing that is more likely to blow up behind the scenes than on track. Spice rating, 2 out of 5. Not much heat between the drivers right now, but Ferrari swinging its weight behind Leclerc is likely to provoke a reaction from Sainz, and he showed in Monza that he's more than prepared to race Leclerc hard if he has to. We reckon it cost McLaren in excess of $20 million to replace Daniel Ricciardo with Oscar Piastri, which demonstrates the high value McLaren places on Piastri's potential, and that increasingly looks as though it was money well spent. Piastri has done a vastly better job in extracting performance from the 2023 McLaren than Ricciardo managed to do with the 2022 McLaren, and that, in turn, has forced Lando Norris to up his own game. Top F1 drivers like having a teammate they know they can beat. It takes away the main source of internal stress for them and means they can focus purely on their own performance. They will already believe themselves to be the fastest guy out there, capable of finding and extracting whatever potential lies within the car. But that can lead to complacency too. Sebastian Vettel clearly got too comfortable with Kimi Raikkonen when they were teammates at Ferrari. Installing Charles Leclerc in Raikkonen's place shattered any illusion Vettel was still getting the most out of those cars. Hamilton probably got a bit too comfortable with Bottas, so Russell's presence at Mercedes is in part an antidote to potential complacency there. And Norris undoubtedly found Ricciardo too easy to beat, so McLaren needed to find a different way to help its star driver kick on. Norris refreshingly admits his discomfort at having a teammate who now pushes him to new heights, and will also know Piastri's potential to improve is that much greater owing to his relative lack of experience. Piastri's impressive natural speed, particularly in fast corners, and capacity to analyse data in weekend and find lap time through the sessions has already created a few challenges for McLaren to manage. The McLaren drivers gently collided at Monza, leading to a warning from team principal Andrea Stella, and on several other occasions Piastri has agreed to move aside to help Norris in the races. In Qatar, where Piastri held track position but Norris was quicker, McLaren had to order Norris to back off and not attack his teammate. For now, Piastri's clear natural deficit in race pace and tyre management is keeping a lid on things. Even when Piastri is faster over a single lap, or Norris makes a mistake and qualifies behind, Norris is so good in the races that there's simply no point in Piastri defying team orders. Stella is doing his best to take a firm but fair approach here too, but teams don't really have much control over top drivers, and Piastri is only relatively easy to manage right now because he's inexperienced. Once he rectifies that tyre management weakness, he will only become more difficult for McLaren and Norris to handle. It's also apparent that Norris has made more errors in qualifying as McLaren's car has become faster and Piastri has established himself as a true force. Partly, Norris's error rate is down to McLaren's car being perhaps the most difficult of F1's top cars to drive on the limit, but Stella admits McLaren is also asking itself internally whether the increased frequency of Norris's mistakes is also a function of Piastri pushing Norris into uncomfortable places. Piastri is clearly and impressively upwardly mobile, so this dynamic is only going to get more uncomfortable for McLaren and Norris in the future. Spice rating, 3 out of 5. The only thing holding the fire back is Piastri's inexperience. This one has bags of potential to kick off as Piastri grows more confident. Already, Norris is feeling the heat.